Hello, Glenn Sample here. Welcome to my channel, The Men on the Sixth Floor. Today we're going to be talking about Oswald's gun. Was it used in the Tippit murder? Was Oswald guilty of murdering Officer Tippit on the day of the assassination of John F. Kennedy? Well, there's a controversy about that, and we're going to be talking about whether or not Oswald used a automatic 38 or a revolver 38. You see, the story is that he was arrested in the Texas theater with a revolver, a 38 revolver. But critics say that Tippit was killed with an automatic 38 because there were bullet holes on the ground. Well, let's talk about that and find out exactly what the situation is. You know, I've been a critic of the Warren Commission ever since it came out. And I am by no means an apologist for the Warren Commission's findings. I do think they were biased in their writing. I do think they were biased in cherry picking witnesses that they interviewed. But I think one thing that they got right, among a few other things, was that Oswald was guilty of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and he was also guilty of the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit. So let's look into this and see. But the main thing I want to point out is, although I believe that Oswald was guilty, I do think our investigation should be who was he associating with? Who was he working with? Oswald was not acting alone. And that's the kind of research I'd like to see enhanced. So enjoy the video. We'll talk later. Thank you. Within an hour of President Kennedy's assassination, Officer J.D. Tippit was patrolling the Oak Cliff area a few miles south of Dealey Plaza. He observed a slim, young white male walking briskly near 10th and Patton Street, who roughly matched the description from a recent police radio bulletin. Tippit stopped his patrol car and called the young man over to the passenger side window. Although the window was rolled up, the young man approached and engaged in a brief conversation with the officer. Then Officer Tippit opened his door and stepped out, moving toward the front of the car. At that moment, the young man drew a handgun and fired 4 shots, fatally wounding Officer Tippit. The shooter, later identified as Lee Harvey Oswald, then turned and walked away from the scene, heading west on 10th Street toward Patton Street. Oswald began emptying the shell casings from his gun and reloading as he walked away towards Jefferson Boulevard. Witnesses nearby saw him holding the weapon in his right hand, shaking the empty casings into his palm and tossing them aside as he fled. One of the first responders to the crime scene was Sergeant Gerald Hill of the Dallas Police Department. He examined the crime scene. It was pointed out to him that a couple of bullet casings were found on the ground near the body. He called in and broadcast the following information. The shells at the scene indicate that the suspect is armed with an automatic 38. Minutes later, Oswald was arrested at the Texas Theater, several blocks away on Jefferson Avenue. But Oswald didn't have an automatic. He carried a Smith & Wesson 6-shot revolver, and it was fully loaded. Listen to Officer Gerald Hill as he explains why his broadcast was incorrect. Interesting recording here.
In all the excitement that was going on then, you just looked to see if it was a 38. Nobody at this point had told the first officer to arrive that Oswald had stopped, deliberately kicked out shells from a 38 revolver before he left that scene. At that time, we didn't know what kind of weapon was used. A guy pointed out some hulls lying on the ground. And at that point, knowing that it's very rare that somebody who shoots somebody stops to reload a 38, we assumed that they were an automatic, where they had kicked out the hulls after they had fired.
That has caused
Some confusion as to why somebody said it was an automatic, and I made the statement it was an automatic myself.
And the reason
because I did not pick up the hull and look at the butt of it to see whether it was, a standard 38 ammunition that would have been used, or ammunition that could have been used in an automatic.
But you made the assumption, though.
I made the assumption that it was an automatic based on the fact that there were hulls there, and based on past police experience that I had never seen anybody that used a revolver to shoot someone stop and stay at the location long enough to reload.
Casings then were found on the ground, led to the police, assuming that the shooter was using an automatic weapon. Oswald was arrested with a 38 caliber revolver, not an automatic. So therefore, as the critics say, therefore the man who left the casings could not have been Oswald. Well, this is a powerful sounding discrepancy, but it crumbles under the weight of the evidence because there were witnesses at the scene along Oswald's escape route, describing watching the gunman flee while actively reloading his revolver, shaking out the empty shell casings from the cylinder onto the ground to make room for fresh ammunition. He was reloading his pistol as he was walking briskly away, likely expecting more action as some of the neighborhood started to appear from their homes, and within minutes a massive manhunt ensued. One of the witnesses was Helen Markham. Markham was the one that was closest to the actual shooting. She testified that she saw Officer Tippit pull up and call a man over to his car. She watched as the man, Oswald, shot Tippit and then walked past the front of the car and ran. Yes, she viewed the police lineup later that evening and positively identified Lee Harvey Oswald. While innocent patsy writers have spent decades attacking her credibility, her identification on the day of the assassination was firm. Then there was Barbara Jean Davis and Virginia Davis. They lived right at the corner of 10th and Patton. The two sisters-in-law who lived in that house heard the shots and ran to the window. They saw a man, whom they identified as Oswald, cutting across their front lawn, revolver in hand. Crucially, they both testified that they watched the man as he was shaking his revolver as if he were emptying it of cartridge cases. Barbara Davis or Virginia Davis both said that he was unloading his gun. They found 2 of the discarded shells in their front yard, and later these were turned over to the police. Both Barbara and Virginia viewed a police lineup that evening, and both positively identified Lee Harvey Oswald as the man they saw fleeing and emptying his gun in their front yard. A taxi driver by the name of William Scoggins was parked right near the Davis home. Scoggins was a taxi driver eating his lunch in his cab parked next to that Davis sister's apartment. He saw Tippit's car pull up and heard the shots. He ducked behind his cab as the gunman fled, passing within 12 feet of his position. The next day, Scoggins viewed a police lineup and positively identified Lee Harvey Oswald as the man he saw fleeing the scene with the pistol in his hand. And down the street, Ted Calloway, a used car lot manager, was working nearby when he heard the shots. He ran out and saw the gunman fleeing with a revolver in a raised pistol position. Calloway, a former Marine, shouted at him, but the man just quickened his pace. Ted Calloway was taken to a lineup, and he positively identified Lee Harvey Oswald as the man he saw running with the gun. He later stated, "I had no trouble at all picking him out of the lineup." And then, closer to the murder scene itself, Domingo Benavides was driving his pickup truck and saw most of the shooting. He was ducking down in his truck, but his testimony is vital because he explicitly states he watched the shooter flee the scene and removed at least 2 spent cartridge cases from his gun as he left.
This man turned from the car then and took a couple steps. Then, as he turned to walk away, he was unloading his gun, and he took the shells, held them in his hand, and as he took off, he threw them in the bushes, more or less like not really trying to get rid of them. I guess he didn't figure he was caught anyway, so he just threw them in the bushes.
So there were 2 people, actually 3 people that saw him unloading and loading his gun on the run. So this innocent patsy, the argument that Oswald was innocent, often hinges on the initial police broadcast that it was an automatic weapon that killed the officer. But it has to ignore the evidence of the Davis sisters and Domingo Benavides, who saw the gunman manually ejecting shells from his revolver. Well, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. What do you think? Was Oswald guilty of killing Kennedy and Tippit, or was he innocent? Or, like he said, he was just a patsy?